So this is a bit of a tough video to do, honestly. I've had people asking me for my opinion on this compared to the real deal, and then I have people asking for me to forget that and just weigh in on the MVSX from a casual perspective. So I'm going to do my best to try and straddle the line between both of those camps for the purposes of my video. I've also kept myself from watching any other reviews or videos on this unit because I wanted my experience with it to be genuine. And that may mean that I contradict something someone else has said, and it may mean that I repeat things that others have said, but going dark assures that the opinions and things that you see in this video are genuinely mine and not biases that I may have picked up elsewhere. Okay, first general impression, this thing is big, bigger than I expected it to be, and that's a pleasant surprise. The control panel left to right is about 19.5 inches, and the unit sits about 25 inches tall. One of my concerns about a bar top like this is how sturdy it might be. I mean, we all have that one friend who gets pretty carried away one beer in and breaks something. Usually the husband of one of your wife's friends, and hell, some of you out there are that person. Don't kid yourselves. Well, rest assured, this thing feels pretty solid, and I was curious, so I weighed it. It's a little over 29 pounds, which isn't too shabby. It also has 4 rubber treads on the bottom to keep it from sliding around. So this isn't going to move on a countertop too easily, which is good considering it boasts more than 30 fighting games to challenge the Charlie Sheen of your friend circle at. Alright, and by now let's address the elephant in the room. What the f*** is Ronald McDonald doing on the Marquee? This is a custom Marquee from Szabo's Arcades that is modeled after an original Marquee that did in fact have old Ronald on it. Although information is sparse, I believe these were used on the 2-slot mini cabarets that were on location at a few McDonald's around the country. Check out Szabo's Arcades for this Marquee as well as other repro artwork for arcades and arcade 1-up machines. As a side note, I will say that the backlight on the Marquee is nice and bright and really makes the top of the unit pop. Next, let's talk a little bit about the display. I personally feel this is a bright spot for the unit. It's a 17-inch LCD with a 1280 by 1024 resolution, and it looks really sharp. It's bright with rich colors, and I didn't notice any substantial blurring when playing games. There's a little bit of backlight bleed that's noticeable around the edges when the MVSX first boots, but that's getting pretty nitpicky with things, and it isn't a distraction or really noticeable when playing. Another thing to note that while the monitor is 17 inches, generally when you load up a game, there's about 15 inches of playing space due to this rendering games pixel perfect. Since we're already talking about the display, I'll go ahead and mention that you have 6 output options in settings. Pixel scaling is your traditional sharp output with no scan lines and is what I typically prefer on emulation devices or even when scaling original hardware for a high-def monitor. I will say though, what surprised me a little here was the pixel scanline option. As someone who typically doesn't like artificial scanlines, I thought this was really well done and I found myself using it far more often than I have on other similar type devices. If you want to fake the look of a CRT, this is your best bet in the options. Now, smooth scaling does exactly what it sounds like and kind of blurs everything. The Neo Geo Mini did this and it couldn't be disabled. I absolutely despise that. I would personally never use this option, but it's here if you want it. I was curious what H scanning line was because to me that sounds like horizontal scan lines, and it is, but it's somehow worse than the pixel scanline option. In fact, it even makes the screen kind of scroll weird on some games, and I definitely avoid this one. As for vertical scanlines and 40-degree scanlines, not even going to address those. Same with the Neo Geo Arcade Stick Pro. They're there, but I have no idea why you'd ever want to use these. In my opinion, you want this set to either pixel scaling or pixel scanlines for the best look on the MVSX. Alright, and since we're looking at some games here, I'll just lightly touch on that because this list has been known for a long time and has been covered in videos even before the review unit shipped out. It's a healthy offering overall. Pretty much all of the prominent Neo fighting games are here, but as a fan of the non-fighters on the Neo, I like seeing games like Shock Troopers, Football Frenzy, and the Sengoku series listed. The drawback here is that the unit does not include games from either the beat-em-up or shooter genres. SNK developed and published Robo Army, Mutation Nation, Last Resort, and Alpha Mission 2, so my assumption would be that they still own those properties and could license them. It's too bad that those are missing on this unit. Now, one set of titles on here, though, is the Classic Collection Volume 1. Volume 1. Now, is it possible we might see additional volumes released with some of those games included? I don't know, but it would be really nice to round out the types of games offered if that did in fact become a reality. Speaking of the collections on here, they are what drives the number displays on the control panel. Now, say I'm in the sports collection. The right player shows a 5 because there are 5 games in this collection. I'm on Super Sidekicks, the first game listed in the collection, so the left player shows a 1. If I move to Baseball Stars Professional, the left player displays a 4 for the 4th game in the collection. As a side note, when scrolling through the games here, if you get to the last game listed, Art of Fighting 3, and you want to go back to the King of Fighters collections, you can't just press right. The scrolling doesn't loop. You have to hold left on the stick and manually scroll all the way back. It's a minor annoyance, but I thought I'd mention it. The big question that everyone always has is, how is the lag on these games? You generally expect that there is going to be some degree of lag with a device like this, given that you're dealing with software emulation, although depending on how well something is coded, it can be pretty low and maybe even unnoticeable to a degree. And then, of course, the input lag of a digital display is also going to factor into that. Now, I unfortunately don't have high-end equipment to test this out with, so the best I can do is show some slow-mo video of a button press. So yeah, this isn't overly scientific, I get it, but it's the best I could do for this, and I knew people would ask. I had to film a few videos at 240 frames per second with a different camera. Quality isn't great, but in general, across several takes and a few games, the number of frames from a button press to on-screen action was about 18. Now keep in mind, that's 18 frames out of 240 in a second. To put that into perspective, I checked out the same games on original hardware and found that to be about 9 frames out of 240. So yes, of course you'd expect original hardware and a CRT to be faster, but just 9 frames of difference between original hardware and emulation in these videos seems to be pretty damn good. Now again, this is a rough and imprecise test. It's subject to a lot of variability, but I wouldn't be terribly surprised to see acceptable values when a proper test can in fact be conducted. The last thing I'm going to look at here is the control panel. It's a pretty decent size at 19.5 inches across, and in fact is only just a few inches shorter in length than an actual Big Red. I will say, I'm not a fan of the 6-button layout for the MVSX, and sure, this will be great for anyone who hacks a device in the future and wants to play 6-button fighters from Capcom or the like, but out of the box, as something that is modeled after the Big Red, I would have liked to have seen the traditional Neo Geo button arc. Now that said, a positive is that you can still at least map the 6 buttons to your liking in the settings. Another thing that caught me a little by surprise was that the buttons don't have your traditional cherry style micro switches, so no click like what is found on North American styled cabinets. Now, this isn't necessarily a negative, and in fact, a lot of people, including myself, have Japanese style buttons installed in their AES sticks. But again, for something modeled after a Big Red, I would have expected the click. You can definitely replace these buttons on your own if you so choose. I think a short stem IL with a D44X should fit inside of here if you want to replace the buttons. But take note, the connector types are sized for 110, not a 187 standard arcade button. So you'll have to either swap the connector type or straight solder the wires to buttons. However, if you just want to swap the stock buttons out for Sanwa or Seimitsu buttons, you can easily do that with the MVSX's 110 connector. So unlike the more Japanese styled buttons, The sticks on this unit are bat tops, which do lean more towards a North American style cabinet. I do have some mild concerns about how easily the tops turn though. They're very loose and spin with minimal effort. The first game I played on the unit was Shock Troopers, a game which requires a constant shifting of the stick to change direction of fire, and it was here right away that I recognized that these sticks have a seemingly long throw to them. They'll click and then travel a little more beyond that click than what I would typically like. The snap back to neutral isn't necessarily quick either, which isn't great for a game like Shock Troopers. I will admit that some of this is personal preference, but again, I like using IL Euro sticks on North American styled cabinets, and those will have a much tighter feel to them than something like the stock sticks on the MVSX. So it's somewhat of an interesting decision to roll with Japanese styled buttons and sticks on a unit that is modeled after a big red cabinet. I think a tighter spring in the stick would definitely help to alleviate some of the looseness of the controls. To that end, a lot of you will instinctively ask if you can mod or replace the sticks in these. Now, you definitely can, and from what I can tell, it looks like our old friend the Seimitsu MS flat mounting plate will come in handy again. My swap preference would be the LS56 again with an octagonal gate and bat top, but that's just me. The downside of swapping out the sticks, the connectors are soldered directly to the stock stick, so you'd have to undo each of these points and then either solder to your drop-in or install your own connectors. It makes the chore a little more effort than what it should be, but it's not insurmountable by any stretch. So that is the Unico MVSX Classic Edition, everyone. Overall, I'm pleasantly surprised by the stature of the unit and its solid feel and design. The emulation feels good on this, and lag doesn't appear to be a showstopper with the titles that I've played. Add to this a gorgeous looking display with two very capable output options, and the unit is on the right path to being something that achieves high marks. I think its downsides are really the lack of a shooter or beat 'em up in the game lineup, but also mostly the system's controls. I really would have preferred the traditional Neo Geo button arc layout as well as North American styled click buttons inside of this unit. The joysticks, while capable, leave a little to be desired in terms of tension and overall feel for my taste, but that is something that can be remedied with a little DIY. So the question becomes, at $450 for the unit, no riser, should you have to do any of those types of modifications on this? Controls to me are always really important as they are the bridge between you and the actual game. So it's something that I know for me personally, I'd have to change out. On the other hand, you are getting 50 Neo Geo games and a pretty solid unit with a nice looking display and small speakers that produce adequate but at times mildly underwhelming sound. For someone like me, it functionally doesn't fulfill any need and it's too expensive to just have as a collector piece. But that shouldn't deter anyone out there who hasn't already invested in original hardware, as this is a good way to instantly have access to a third of the Neo Geo's library in a 3/4 scale cabinet. This isn't going to be for everyone, but for those who are looking for a little more extra beyond something like the Neo Geo Arcade Stick Pro, I think this checks enough boxes to make you happy, provided you understand that you may find yourself upgrading the unit's controls. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks to Jay at SNK as well as ETA Prime for the mention. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I will catch you all next time. Later, guys.